The dean didn't even look up from his desk. He just slid a folder to the edge and said, "Your brother's academic record speaks for itself. The plagiarism is clear. The committee has reviewed everything. Case closed." Then he leaned back and added, almost as an afterthought, "You should know. Mr. Hartwell's family has been very generous to this institution. I'd encourage you to think carefully before making any noise about this. My name is Jake Mercer. I'm 31 years old. For 6 years, I worked cyber intelligence operations for the U.S. Army, 2 deployments overseas, then 3 years contracted to a private firm doing digital forensics for federal cases. I know how systems work. I know how people hide things inside them. And I know exactly what it looks and sounds like when someone in power tells you to sit down and be quiet." I didn't say a word to the dean. I just picked up the folder, nodded once, and walked out. My brother Marcus had called me 10 days earlier. He was 19, first semester of college, the kind of kid who stayed up until 2 in the morning not partying but reading, building, writing. He'd earned a full merit scholarship to Caldwell University, a private school in North Carolina with a reputation built on its engineering program and its very wealthy alumni base. Marcus had worked 4 years of high school for that scholarship. He was the first person in our family to go to college on something other than loans. The call came in on a Thursday night. His voice was flat in a way I hadn't heard since our father's funeral. "Jake, they're saying I cheated. They're saying I copied Brandon Hartwell's research project. They're suspending me pending a full academic review. I asked him to send me everything. Every email, every timestamp, every draft file, every message. He sent it within the hour. I didn't sleep that night. What I found was straightforward to me, though I understood why it wasn't to the university's committee. Marcus had been working on a signal processing project for his intro engineering seminar since the 3rd week of classes. His files had metadata showing creation dates, edit histories, version saves going back 7 weeks. Brandon Hartwell's submission showed a creation date of 4 days before the deadline, a single draft, no revision history, and 17 passages that matched Marcus's work word for word. To anyone who understood file metadata, the story was obvious. To a committee of administrators who wanted it to go away, it was easy to bury. Brandon Hartwell's father was Richard Hartwell. Richard Hartwell had donated $4 million to Caldwell's new engineering wing 3 years ago. His name was on the building. The morning after my meeting with the dean, a message came through on Marcus's student portal. Someone had gained access to his account and posted it from there, which told me they felt completely untouchable. It was a screenshot of the committee's decision letter, and someone had written across it in red text, "Stay home, scholarship boy, this isn't your league. Tell your brother to back off or we make sure you never work in this field. You're done here." They thought that message would scare us. It did the opposite. It gave me a digital fingerprint I hadn't had before. I called Marcus that night. He was staying with a friend off campus, not sleeping, barely eating. He asked me the same question in 3 different ways during that conversation, each one smaller and quieter than the last. "Is there anything you can actually do? Or is this just how it goes for people like us?" I told him to give me 2 weeks. The first thing I did was pull every public record I could find on Richard Hartwell's relationship with Caldwell University. Donation records, board meeting minutes, correspondence filed under their nonprofit disclosure requirements. It took about 4 hours. What I found in the board minutes was a note from 18 months ago. A motion to review academic integrity procedures, seconded by 2 board members, then tabled indefinitely. No reason given. That tabling with no explanation was the first thread. I reached out to a former colleague of mine, a woman named Diane who had spent 8 years doing digital forensics for the Department of Education's Office of Inspector General before going private. I didn't tell her everything. I sent her the file metadata, Marcus's submission history, and Brandon's submission, and asked her what she saw. She came back within 2 hours. "This is textbook," she wrote. "The copied submission shows 0 organic development. No one writes a research project in one sitting with no revisions unless they're copying. Your brother's file structure is exactly what legitimate work looks like. If this went to an independent review, it would take about 20 minutes to conclude." I saved that in writing. Then I started looking into Brandon Hartwell more carefully. What I found over the next 3 days was that Brandon was not the originator of this scheme. He was a repeater of it. 2 semesters earlier, a junior named Priya Venkataraman had been quietly pushed out of the university's honors research program after a grade dispute. Her advisor, a professor with close ties to the Hartwell family, had flagged her final thesis for irregularities. She'd left school, transferred, never made a public complaint. I found her through an alumni networking group. I sent her a message explaining who I was and what had happened to my brother. She replied the next morning. "I've been waiting for someone to call," she said. I have everything saved. Priya had kept every version of her thesis, every email, every feedback session recorded on her laptop, every grade sheet. What she also had was something I didn't expect. She had a recording of a conversation between her advisor and another faculty member in which they discussed, casually, like it was administrative housekeeping, how to document the irregularity claim to make it bulletproof. They didn't know she was in the adjacent room with her laptop open. I asked her if she'd be willing to let me use it. She said yes before I finished the sentence. By day 5, I had a picture that went beyond Marcus. I had a pattern. Brandon Hartwell and his two close friends, Davis Rowe and Cole Stanger, had each submitted projects in the previous year that showed similar metadata anomalies to their respective classmates' work. One of those classmates had failed out. Another had transferred after a disciplinary hearing. Neither had made a formal external complaint. The university's internal process had absorbed it all quietly. The system wasn't just protecting Brandon Hartwell. It was protecting itself. I built a document. Not a messy folder of screenshots but a clean, sequenced, time-stamped forensic timeline. Every piece of evidence labeled, sourced, and cross-referenced. I'd done this kind of work for federal cases. I knew what held up and what didn't. What I was building would hold up. On day 8, I made a mistake I was counting on someone else to make. I let it be known through a mutual campus contact that Marcus was considering dropping the appeal and returning home. I wanted Brandon's group to feel safe. People who feel safe get careless. They got careless on day 9. Brandon posted a private story from a party. In the background, clearly audible, Davis Rowe was laughing and saying, "Man, the scholarship kid actually thinks he's coming back. His brother's out here playing detective like it matters." Then Cole Stanger said, "Who's going to listen to them? The dean already closed it." Then Brandon said something I made sure to clip, clean up with audio enhancement software, and save with a timestamp. He said, "My dad made one call. That's all it took. One call." That was now in my file. On day 10, I reached out to 3 people. The first was a journalist at a mid-sized investigative outlet that covered higher education policy. She had broken 2 stories in the past year about donor influence in university admissions and had been looking, she told me when I called, for something with documented forensic backing. I told her I had that. The second person I contacted was a former Army colleague now working with an education policy nonprofit that monitored accreditation compliance. I asked him about Caldwell's accreditation review cycle and what kinds of documentation irregularities would trigger a formal inquiry. He told me. I made notes. The third was an attorney who specialized in student civil rights cases, a woman named Sandra Okafor who had taken 2 cases against private universities in the past 4 years, both of which had settled substantially. I sent her a summary of what I had. She called me back within 3 hours and said 4 words I needed to hear. "This is very solid." I gave it 2 more days. Then, I sent the sealed package. The journalist received the full forensic file, Priya's documentation, the audio clip from the party, the metadata analysis, the board meeting records, and a written statement from Diane, my forensics colleague, attesting to her professional conclusions. I gave the journalist 48 hours before I contacted anyone else. She needed that time to verify independently, and I wanted the story to be airtight before it became public. Sandra Okafor filed a formal complaint with the university's accrediting body the following morning, citing the board meeting records, the pattern of dismissals, and the conflict of interest created by Richard Hartwell's board position and simultaneous role as father to the accused party. The complaint noted that the university had failed to apply its own academic integrity policies equitably, and that documented evidence of a pattern existed across multiple students. I submitted Marcus's full appeal package, now including Diane's expert analysis, Priya's corroboration, and the audio clip, to the university's external ombudsman, a position they were required to maintain under their accreditation terms and which they clearly had not expected anyone to actually use. Then I waited. 46 hours after I sent the journalist's package, the story went live. The headline was careful and factual. It didn't name Brandon Hartwell specifically. It referred to him as a student connected to a major donor family. But it laid out the metadata evidence, quoted Diane's professional assessment, described Priya's case as a documented prior incident, and included the board meeting note about the tabled integrity review. It also quoted the audio clip. "My dad made one call. That's all it took. One call." The piece was shared by 2 higher education policy accounts on the same afternoon. By the following morning, it had been picked up by a regional news network. By that evening, 3 other outlets were requesting comment from Caldwell University. The university's communications office issued a statement about their commitment to academic integrity and their ongoing review process. It was the kind of statement that says nothing and signals everything. I was sitting in my car in a parking lot 200 miles away, drinking bad coffee and watching the notifications come in on my phone when Marcus called. "Are people actually reading this?" he asked. "They are," I said. "What happens now?" "Now they have to choose," I told him. "Get ahead of it or get buried by it." By the end of that week, the accrediting body had opened a preliminary inquiry. That wasn't public yet, but Sandra knew through her channels. And she forwarded me the confirmation. The inquiry meant that Caldwell had to respond formally, with documentation, to every item in the complaint. It meant that the cozy internal process that had swallowed Marcus's appeal could no longer operate in the dark. Richard Hartwell resigned from the university's board of trustees 5 days after the story ran. The announcement was buried in the university's news releases between a parking structure update and a faculty award. But it was there. Brandon Hartwell's scholarship, which he held despite his family having donated $4 million to the school, apparently as a matter of principle, was under review. That detail had come out through the accreditation inquiry, which required the university to disclose all scholarship allocations for students involved in pending integrity proceedings. Davis Rowe and Cole Stanger had their own submissions flagged for independent metadata review after Sandra included the pattern documentation in a supplemental filing. Neither of them said anything publicly. Their Instagram accounts went quiet around the same time. Marcus's case was sent to an independent academic review panel, external to the university, which was one of the remedies Sandra had requested. The panel included 2 engineering faculty from peer institutions and an academic integrity expert. They reviewed the metadata, the submission histories, and Diane's analysis. Their finding took 9 days. It was unambiguous. Marcus's work showed clear primary authorship. Brandon Hartwell's submission showed no evidence of original development and significant structural overlap with a prior existing document. The university reinstated Marcus's enrollment and his scholarship within 48 hours of receiving the panel's report. They sent the notification by email. Standard formatting. No personal acknowledgement. No apology. That was fine. I hadn't expected grace from people who had never shown any. Sandra filed the civil complaint anyway. Not for reinstatement, which had already happened. For the formal record. For Priya, for the student who had failed out a year earlier and never gotten an explanation. The complaint named the university, 3 administrators by title, and requested binding policy reform, third-party oversight of academic integrity proceedings going forward, and a written institutional apology to each affected student. We were not asking for damages. We were asking for the door to stay closed after us. The week Marcus moved back into his dorm room, I drove up to help him carry boxes. It was a cold Saturday, early March, the kind of day that can't decide if it wants to be winter or spring. He didn't say much while we were moving things in. Neither did I. We'd never been a family that talked around the edges of things. When we were done, we sat on the edge of his bed in that small room that smelled like fresh laundry and old radiator heat, and he looked at the window for a while without saying anything. Then he said, "They picked me because they thought no one was watching." "They always do," I said. "There was a girl before me. Priya. And probably someone before her." "Yes." He was quiet again. Then, so, what actually stopped them? I thought about that for a moment. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to say it right. "Records," I said. "They stopped themselves the first time they created a file with a timestamp. They just didn't know anyone would ever read it carefully." He nodded slowly. He looked older than 19 in that moment. Not in a sad way. In a way that meant he understood something he hadn't before. Walking back to my car that afternoon, I got a text from Priya. She'd been notified that morning that the university's external ombudsman had formally acknowledged her prior case as part of the pattern documentation and that she was entitled to petition for a review of her academic record. She wasn't going back to Caldwell. She'd built a life at her new school. But she wanted the record corrected. She wanted it documented that she had not done what they said she had done. "Thank you," she wrote. I stopped believing anyone would find it. I wrote back, "It was always there. It just needed someone to look." I drove home along the coast road, windows down despite the cold, thinking about what my old unit commander used to say whenever we finished a mission that had gone long and sideways and complicated. He'd say, "The work doesn't feel like much while you're doing it. It feels like something after." He was right. Standing in a dean's office 10 days earlier, being told to think carefully before making noise, I had felt nothing except clear. Clear the way you feel when you know exactly what the problem is and exactly what you know how to do about it. The noise had been made. Not by me, not loudly. By the evidence itself, which had been sitting there waiting since the first day someone decided that a kid on a merit scholarship from a family without a building named after them didn't deserve the same rules as everyone else. Marcus graduated 4 years later with honors. His capstone project, the one he built from scratch in that first semester before any of this happened, was cited by one of his professors as one of the strongest undergraduate engineering analyses he'd seen in 12 years of teaching. It was published in a university journal. His name on it. His work. Documented, time-stamped, verified, and permanent. The Hartwell Engineering Wing still stands on Caldwell's campus. The name is still on the building. Some things take longer to change than others. But the policy did change. Independent external review for every contested academic integrity case. No donor or board member permitted to serve in an oversight capacity during any proceeding involving a student. Third-party audits of scholarship allocations annually. Sandra had negotiated every clause, and the binding agreement was a matter of public institutional record. The next student who sits in front of a committee and hears the case is closed will have something Marcus didn't have at the beginning. A process that's required, by contract, to be fair. Not because Caldwell suddenly became principled. Because someone made sure the terms were written down where everyone could see them. That's the thing about systems built to protect the powerful. They count on the people underneath them not knowing how to use the same tools. They count on silence. On exhaustion. On the reasonable assumption that one call from the right father is worth more than 7 weeks of honest work. What they don't count on is someone who has spent years learning exactly how information gets buried, and who has all the time in the world to dig.